Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's episode, I'll be joined by our true guitar legend, Jeff "Skunk" Baxter. Skunk has the rare distinction of being in two of the most important bands of all time. He was a founding member of Steely Dan and then joined the Doobie Brothers at the pinnacle of their career. Skunk has played on some of my all-time favorite songs, and he's an incredibly interesting guy. Here's my interview. Skunk, welcome.
Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate your hospitality.
Okay, so I want to go back to the beginning and talk about...
Back to the beginning.
Let's go back to the beginning. Well, let's talk about...
Cretaceous era? Please saw it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, you talked about working in guitar shops, doing guitar setups. Kind of take it from there on forward and some of the people that you met during that time period.
Well, a good thing about working in any music store is wherever you are, you end up meeting a large cross-section of the musicians in that particular area. And for me, probably the best experience was working at Dan Armstrong's shop on 48th Street in New York when I was like 13, 14. I was working at Jimmy's music shop across from Manny's. And because I grew up in Mexico City, there was really nobody to repair guitars. So I kind of had to do it on the fly. And there was an elderly Mexican gentleman named Raul who had a TV radio repair shop. So I learned a little bit about electronics from him. And then my dad gave me the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers radio manual, which was the original, by the way, the original passive equalization circuit for Fender amplifiers.
Okay.
So, you know, it's all
related.
It's all heuristic, right? So by that time I was repairing guitars out of Jimmy's, and Danny noticed that there weren't any guitars coming out of Jimmy's, so he came, and at that time, it was $1.25 an hour was minimum wage. So Danny walked in, told Frank Squilacci that he wanted to hire me, and he said, "I'll pay you $5 an hour."
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So I went up to work at Dan's, and everybody came in. That's where I met Les Paul for the first time. And so we started to become friends. And the guitar players that came into that place, because we spent maybe 3 hours repairing guitars, and the rest of the time was in the front row playing.
Yeah.
So in the front room, you'd find Eddie Deal, Sam Brown. I mean, you know, Eddie Deal's the best bebopper I ever heard in my life. These guys were just, and Danny was no slouch as a player either. So, you know, one day you walk out of the front room and it's Frank Zappa and Mike Bloomfield, and they're sitting around and everybody's playing and having a good time. And for Danny and Eddie, because I was a little snot, my job, he said, he handed me a Gretsch Tennessee that had 2 bass strings and 4 regular strings, and said, "You're playing bass and comping chords because we're going to solo."
Yeah.
So I learned that technique. So later on, when I did some work with Chet Atkins, his guitar said, "Where did you learn how to do that?" And so I told him the same. This guy was the only other guy I'd ever seen to do that. So anyway, any afternoon there would be all these great players. So one day, Andres Segovia comes in because he's playing at Carnegie Hall.
Right.
And one of the tuning machines on his Ramirez had broken.
Wow.
And as you know, it's 3 on a side.
Yeah.
There's really nothing you could do.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really sure. We didn't have anything in stock, so I ran across the street to Charles Ponte, who was right next to Manny's, who was the cello and violin guy, thinking, you know, maybe. He had one set of 3 on a side. So I bought those, took them back, took the Ramirez back in the room, repaired it, strung it up. And meanwhile, it was Frank Zappa, Mike Bloomfield, and I'm trying to think of the other guitar player. It might have been Sam Brown, I'm not sure. And they're all rocking away. They're all standing up and they're all having a great time. And Mr. Segovia is just sitting there on the couch in the front room, very quiet. So I brought the guitar out. I said, "Hold on, guys. Hold on a second." So I hand him the instrument. Sitting there, he tunes it up. he plays the first 64 bars from the Concerto de Aranjuez by Rodrigo. And it sounds stupid, but it's like all the photons left the room except for Andres Segovia. I mean, this man, whatever was going on with this guy, there was something going on. He had an aura about him.
Right.
And everybody, the place got completely quiet. And then afterwards, he said, "Thank you very much," paid Dan, and then turned to me in Spanish. He said, "Would you please tell them that you don't hang it around your neck like a canoe paddle. You hold it next to your body because it's a part of you. It's right next to your heart." And I thought, yeah, I'm sitting down. Works for me. Now, I did have a knee injury. I had to do that for a little while. And when B.B. King had his knee operation, he said, "Skunk, if I'd only known, I would have never stood up to play."
You were one of the only guys that did that.
And it's the way to play. I mean, Mr. Segovia knows, I think, what he's talking about. And it is really the way to play. And I remember sitting down playing a lot, especially with the Doobies, and getting a lot of crap for it. Said, "Oh, that's no good. You got to." Said, "Hey, you guys could do the trampolines, all that kind of stuff. My job, get a nice set of headphones, get a good mix, sit and play the guitar. That's my job." And it was interesting. It got more focus sitting down and playing than running around. And
to me, that was a part of your thing, was that.
But I never really thought of it as a gimmick or anything. I thought that I will be able to do my best performance this way.
Other people that you met during that time period, you knew Jimi Hendrix, is that right?
Yeah, with Jimmy James.
Jimmy James.
Right. And he had a band called Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. And he came into Jimmy's music store with an old beat-up Duosonic.
Okay.
I think he had just, if I'm correct, he was playing with Joey D and the Starlighters down at the Peppermint Lounge. But I think he just got off the road with Little Richard. But he had, this beat-up Duosonic. Cool guitars, but they were like Fender student guitars.
Yeah.
And he wanted to trade it. And I had just put together a beautiful white Stratocaster that I had strung up, a right-handed Strat that I'd strung up left-handed and intonated and everything for a person that wanted it. They hadn't showed up. So it was sitting there. So I went, "Okay, I'll trade you even." So Frank and Jim Squilacci docked me 3 weeks' pay because they said that was not a good deal. And these guys are businessmen. I get it.
Yeah.
But Jimmy then invited me to come down to the Cafe Wa to hear the band. Bass player was late, so I got a chance to play a tune or two. And after that, we became friends in a sense that, you probably have friends that you don't see for a long time.
Yeah.
But as soon as you sit down with them, it's like timeless.
Yeah.
It's like what we were talking about entanglement with electrons. It's quantum physics, right?
Right.
It's just, it's perfect. So the same thing with Jimmy. Whenever we had a chance to get together, very quiet, very pensive. The first time I heard him play "Wind Cries Mare," I said, "That's it. That's it. This guy has synthesized Little Beaver and Curtis Mayfield into a style of guitar that I will strive in any way I can to learn to play and to perfect and to take to the next step." But yeah, a very fine person. It was very interesting too because that was around the time of the Vietnam War. And Jimmy, I believe, was in the 101st Airborne.
He was.
And you're playing down in the village. And of course, everything is, rah, 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 and hate the war and such. And every time they would try to engage him, he would just quiet. So I think he was a patriot. As a matter of fact, I think that's why he played the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock.
Makes sense.
From the heart.
Yeah.
But the conversations were always about music. We're always about Fender guitars. And he had a very interesting childhood. Not easy, but he managed to find all the opportunities that you could find to play. And got involved with some very well-known people very quickly. So anyway, I miss him. I think he was a very special person. He changed the world as far as I'm concerned. He, like Jeff Beck, was, I'm going to say is, because for me they were. You never know where they're going.
Right.
And to me, that's the hallmark. There are other guitar players, very well-known guitar players, you know where they're going, which is okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the idea of pushing the envelope a little bit.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Of the people that regularly watch my channel, 58% are actually not subscribed. So I encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me to get even more of my dream guests and continue to grow my channel. Thank you.
We were talking about improvising.
Yeah.
And why improvisation is important. And you had asked me how to do it. So I'll tell you the deep secret.
I was asking how you do it, because you have such a unique style of playing.
Thank you. I never really think about it because as a studio rat, I mean, 1 minute I'm doing a Doritos commercial, and then the next minute I'm doing an album with Barbra Streisand, and after that a soundtrack for Jamie Warner. So I'm not really sure what style is where. You just call on it. I'd given a couple of guitar lessons. I suck at that. But somebody said, I did give guitar lessons for a month.
Okay.
Out of Jack's Drum Shop in Boston.
Nice.
And I only gave one lesson. Said, here's the deal. I'm going to teach you how to sing to play the guitar. Because you could sing anything, really. I mean, even if your voice sucks, it doesn't make any difference. You can sing anything. Well, if you could translate that to your fingers, you have a built-in guitar teacher. And you listen to musicians like Oscar Peterson and stuff. You know what they're doing. They're doing it. They're singing it. That's what they're doing. And they have managed to connect that with their fingers. So if you just sit there, take 5-10 minutes a day, and just go da 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 da. Just teach yourself to do that. 6 months you're going. You're connected. So now you can phrase any way you want to, and you can, by learning the phrasing of other singers, and now being able to hear in your voice when you watch a guitar player play, bingo. That's it. That's all you need to do. You just got to put the two together and teach yourself to do it. It's not hard.
Improvising was such a big part of being a session musician because you would read charts, but you'd...
If there was 16 bars with nothing on it, yeah. I mean, if it's fly shit, I'm calling Dennis Budimir or Tommy Tedesco anyway. I mean, I could read okay, but I mean, these guys like fly shit,
Right.
But yes, there are times when they say, we just want you to do what you do. And you're right, improvising. And then you have to draw on, okay, now it's an analytical process. Do you repeat the theme as the opening piece? What is it about the song that you can use to relate your solos to and still create a composition? Because I think every solo should have a beginning, a middle, and it should be a composition, even if you're doing it on the fly.
Yeah.
So, but I guess I'll take that as a compliment, because the improvisational part to me is the most fun. Obviously, I mean, I could do whatever I want. I mean, I don't have to play this crap for like Doritos. And Tommy Tedesco turned me out of that a long time ago. We did was a Doritos commercial, actually. That's why I reference it. And he said, no matter what, here's what you play. Da, 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 da. I said, what if the charts? No. Forget it. Just play that.
Right.
They'll love you. So yeah, you learn the little bits and pieces of that improv. Well, yeah, sort of. But the idea of being able to somehow synthesize the artist's music and reproduce it in such a way that's relatable, but also takes the musical piece and takes it down a slightly different place so people could breathe and then come back to it. Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that.
When you started playing sessions, would they be, how did you even get into that?
Yeah, I mean, and hanging around studios where in New York, I think it was at Mayfair Studios, I was delivering some amplifiers for the Manhattan Guitar Club,
Okay.
which was kind of a cool deal. You paid a fee, and there would be an amplifier in all the studios, and they gave you a key, like a key for a key switch.
Yeah.
So you joined this group, and you knew that every studio you went to, you had an amplifier, and they were usually Reverber Rockets or Gemini, Ampeg amps.
Yeah.
So, you took out your key, and you didn't have to schlep. You just
Great.
carried your guitar. So I was delivering a couple of amps for them. Gosh, this would be back when I was like 15 or 16 in New York. And one of the guitar players didn't show. So, being the calm, shy guy that I am, just got a chance to do some playing and really loved it.
Yeah.
I loved the whole idea of this. And I'd actually made a record by accident when I was 11 with Abraham Laborio.
Okay.
Because I grew up in Mexico City, and so did Abe. And we had a surf band called the Tarantulas.
Okay.
And so we were invited, somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, up at the Radio Éxito, which was a big 50,000 watt station in Mexico City. And they played American music for 4 hours a day.
Okay.
So we went up there, took our amps, played our song. And remember, the Ventures started out as just Bob Bogle and Don Wilson. No drums and no bass.
Yeah.
So it was just the two of us. So we did our song, and they cut a lacquer, which for all you folks out there who don't know what that is, back in the day, the way recording was done was they would take a steel disc, coat it with lacquer, and then use a lathe to cut the grooves as you were playing into this disc, which you could play, or eventually it's what they used as the master for pressing vinyl records. So they cut this disc and they started playing it. So now we're getting gigs. We're 11, 12 years old. In Mexico, there were no rules. We were playing bars, parties, and stuff. And I actually got a chance to play with a wonderful band called Los Hooligans. There were some Mexican rock and roll bands there at the time that were just killer.
Wow. Okay.
Great drummers, great bass players. So the Hooligans, I met Humberto Cisneros, who was one of the guitar players in the band, at a party that we were playing at. He was invited, and he said, "Would you like to come and play with us?" Myself and a guy named Doug Messenger, who was the other American guitar player down there. We were kind of the underground darlings of the rock scene. We knew 3 chords, and you could play solos with 2 fingers. Hey, good, And then I saw Johnny Ortega, who was the lead guitar player in the band, plug a Les Paul with the strings like James Burton had done, moved the string gauges down and put a banjo string on the top, into a turn reverb and turn everything up to 10. And I went,
That's what I'm doing.
that's it. That's what I want to do. So I started playing some big shows. Los Hooligans, Los Absent Boys, Los Locos del Ritmo, Los Hermanos Carrion, these big, rock shows. So they were recording. And I mean, I never got paid for it, but sometimes I would go in and play. And I loved the whole process. So in New York, I started to get some sessions, and then moved to Boston, where I started to do a lot of session work. There was a place called Natural Sound outside of Boston that was basically a studio that cut a lot of country music.
Okay.
Because when the trucks are going up 95, once you get past WWVA in Wheeling, West Virginia, and you get way up into Boston, you can still get it. But it turns out that New England was a big country western mecca.
Interesting.
So we would sit in the house band out at Natural Sound, and they would bring people in. And we would just sit there. It was kind of like maybe the Boston version of Stax Volt or Sun Records. We just sit there and make records, play. So I really began to love the process, was hanging out at Intermedia Sound. That's where I met Gary Katz. And that's where he introduced me, had me come down to New York to do a session with Linda Hoover. The songs being written by Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. That's kind of how all that started.
Right.
But hanging around that studio, they'll say, somebody always needed a guitar player for something. Or piano. I played a bit of piano too. And drums, but mostly guitar. So the session thing just became...
Just being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
When you played on the first Steely Dan record, Can't Buy a Thrill, 1972, were those demos for, that wasn't initially going to be a band, was it?
Right. Gary Katz had gone out to Los Angeles and gotten hired by ABC Dunhill and had gotten Walter Becker and Donald Fagen a publishing deal.
Okay.
So when I first met Donald and Walter on the Linda Hoover sessions, it was interesting. I said, man, I've never heard music like this. It's really cool. And they said, well, we've never heard a guitar player play this like this. I said, well, maybe we should form a band someday. The idea was kind of everybody keeping an eye out. So when Gary got the publishing deal, it was like, the flare went up from the West Coast, and he said, let's put together a band. So Walter and Donald said, you know any great drummers? I said, yeah, Jimmy Hodder from the Beat Game, which was a band that Gary had produced. You know any great singers? Dave Palmer.
Yeah.
From the other side. Rikki Phelps, who was one of the great guitar players in New York. I met Rikki at Dan Armstrong's, and that's how I met his band. Then met Dave. This sneaker net.
Yeah.
And so they knew I had a friend, Denny Diaz, and I was it. So I was moving to Los Angeles anyway to audition for the Flying Burrito Brothers, paint pedal steel. And that never quite worked out. I ended up playing in the house band at the Palomino Club, which is fine with me. But when we were out there, we formed this band. And we would, rehearse. And we were rehearsing in the office of the president of ABC Dunhill Records.
Okay.
Jay Lasker. And his partner, the vice president, Howard Stark. Both wonderful human beings. And Jay was the epitome of the record guy.
With the cigar.
What do you boys got? So we were rehearsing every night, and then we would at his office, and then we would clean everything up so that when he showed up, because he had the biggest place it was the only place we could set up.
Right.
Well, one day we got lazy, and we didn't clean up. And he's going, what the hell's going on here? And so Gary says, well, there's this band. And we didn't have a name at the time. He said, all right, let me hear them. And we cut some demos, and he liked the band. So he signed it. And we were trying to decide whether we were going to call the band Big Nardo in the 8th grade or Steely Dan. And I'm not sure who made the comment, Big Nardo in the 8th grade was too long to fit onto an album cover. So maybe we'll make it Steely Dan. And of course, we were all snot-nosed kids anyway, all East Coast kids that had gone to prep school and college. So English lit, writing. So everybody had read William Burroughs and all the great, the avant-garde artists and poetry, poets and stuff. And everybody had read Thomas Pike and all that stuff. Lawrence Ferlinghetti. We all consider ourselves sort of experts at this, which we weren't. But So that's where Steely Dan came from, a novel called Naked Lunch by William Burroughs, who was also an underground writer at the time. Guys who were writing for Evergreen Magazine and The Village Voice and stuff. So anyway, so we called the band Steely Dan, and we started cutting demos with some of the guys from Turtles, with the Mark Volman and Howard Kano doing background vocals.
Okay.
And I'd known Mark and Howard from touring with them, the Turtles, when I was in Ultimate Spinach. So it's just this, it's interesting how this community, things bubble up, and I know this guy who can, yeah. So that's kind of how it all got started. So when we went in to cut the first record, it was a band. So everybody at the time does what a normal band does. If you are a guitar player, you're expected to contribute your guitar playing. And so by that time, I had been done a lot of sessions anyway.
Yeah.
So I was really comfortable with what can I do. So when you talk about my old school, being a closet sax player, I've never played saxophone in my life. But as a kid, the only books where you could really learn jazz and jazz improvisation were trumpet and saxophone books. Mm-hmm. There weren't really any guitar books at the time.
Right.
There was a Mel Bay book. Right. So, and Ted Green hadn't written Chord Chemistry yet, which is the greatest book ever written about guitar playing, Chord Chemistry 1 and 2. But, so it was just, this whole improvisation thing with Steely Dan. I was a frustrated sax player because that's how I learned. So all my phrasing, if you listen to my old school and think about saxophone.
Absolutely.
It's a sax solo.
Right.
And it's all sax solos.
When you were making those records, those early records, what were those 16 tracks that you guys would be recording on back then in the 1972?
I think in 72 it was 24 tracks.
Was it 24? Okay. How would sessions go down for something like that compared to if you're sitting in as a session guy on someone else's session? When you're a band, would you guys go in and do your basic tracks as a band?
Sometimes. Sometimes. And there was a lot of rehearsal.
Yeah.
Which is fine with me.
Yeah.
Rehearse everything and get the ideas down and then begin to disassemble it and then put it back together. And I look at photos that people have taken of us, in the first sessions. Everyone's kind of lounging around and we're all playing like this. It wasn't loose, but it wasn't uptight and it wasn't super, super disciplined. But everybody was laser focused, for sure.
Okay, I want to play my old school. I want to talk. We talked about your solo, but I want for people that
guitar, by the way, I just finished routing the body out.
Okay.
For that guitar.
Okay.
In the parking lot at Valley Sound where I was working repairing guitars.
Was it a Tele or a Strat?
Strat.
Strat.
It was a maple Strat that I'd made, hard rock maple, so it weighed 1 million tons, and I had put the electronics from a guitar that Eddie Cochran had owned into that guitar, and then blew the sawdust off and took it down to the session.
On the Midnight Special, there's a version of you guys playing, Steely Dan playing, and you're playing a solo on it, but you're playing a Tele, I want to say. But the Tele had different kind of pickups on it.
Right.
What were those pickups?
Well, that Telecaster, one of my favorite sports was to go down to Corona and go dumpster diving at the Fender factory. Because they were always throwing stuff away.
Yeah.
And I knew those guys there, they didn't care. So I'm in the dumpster, and I found that body, but it was this terrible brown color. So I used some finish remover on it. A little too much, because the laminated broke, so the guitar broke in half. So I re-glued it back together, never ended up finishing it. And then I was making Skunk sonic pickups for friends of mine.
Okay.
Winding them on my mom's sewing machine.
Okay.
And people who wanted something special. Those pickups in that guitar were Skunk sonic pickups. They sounded much different than most. They were both humbucker and single coil.
Yeah.
You could go back and forth.
Yeah.
Had a nice tone to it.
Great tone.
And it was a long process to make them. So I made a few for friends. That was it. But yeah, that's what that was.
I remember when I first saw that years and years ago, I was like, what pickups are those? Of course, you made them.
Well,
okay, so let's talk about the different solos in here. Playing guitar and rhythm on it?
Yeah. So is Denny.
Yeah.
Upstairs when I heard about the whole affair, I said, whoa, no, William and Mary won't do now. Well, I did not think the girl could be so rude, and I'm never going back to my old
I'm gonna play the other solos after too. Okay, so that when you did that sounds like a sax, like a Barry sax.
Yeah, and and there's a solo after that where I'm trying to get harmonic because I want to get the honk.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, where am I? What planet am I on?
Okay, so but that now when you're doing a solo like that, was that actually while the track was going on? Were you playing it live, or would that be overdub? Okay.
But that was one or two takes.
So you guys would go in, you'd play the basic tracks down. Something like this with horns, you'd probably do after, right? They would do that after.
Oh, yeah, it was process number A.
Okay.
Basic tracks, layer.
And they would say, okay, Skunk, you're going to play the solos. And you play all the solos in this song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And during rehearsals,
yeah,
Denny and I would work out who was going to do what, because Denny's a wonderful guitar player.
Yeah. So whoever kind of jumped in, I'll take this song, I'll take this song.
Well, we'd see what fit.
Yeah.
It seemed to work out very well.
Yeah.
But my old school was definitely something that needed some honking, yakety guitar, I guess.
I mean, that's the first time I heard someone do the kind of pinch harmonics.
Getting harmonics and getting looking for other notes.
Right. Let's continue on this.
Going outside her door. Soon they're gonna be in bloom up in Annandale. I can't stand her doing what she did before, living like a gypsy queen in a fairy tale. Well, I hear the whistle, but I can't go. I'm gonna take her down to Mexico. She said, whoa, no, how I won't do that. Well, I did not think the girl could be so rude, and I'm never going back to my old
Okay, so before we play the last solo in here, and this all makes sense now. The sax solo.
Well, that's where my head was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who did the horn arrangements for things like this?
Jimmy Haskell,
Okay.
great arranger. I ended up doing a bunch of work for him on a lot of movie soundtracks. This guy was a fantastic arranger, and he came in to do a lot of the horn stuff. I think there were some other folks, but most of it was Jimmy.
Yeah, it's a really great arrangement. In the next solo, you do some chord things here that I want to talk about.
California tumbles into the sea. That'll be the day I go back to Annandale. Tried to warn you about Chino and Daddy G, but I can't seem to get to you through the U.S. mail.
Love how it does the extra times there. Okay. Skunk, how long would the solo go on for?
A long time.
Okay, you just keep playing, right?
Yeah.
And how would you decide when they were mixing it, like how far to go? It's like, oh, let's keep that lick at the bottom.
Everybody's thinking about the radio and.
But when you're going like do those the jumps with the chords and things like that, nobody really did that. That was really your style. But yet you play many different styles of solos. But in this particular song,
well, to me again, it was like da 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 da. And when I think I got the inspiration because most of the horn parts in the song are syncopated.
yes,
They're antithetical to the kind of very straight ahead flow and feel of the song. So I think that's what inspired me to say, okay, I want to continue that. I want to use that format for the solos because we've already laid it out, so it's not completely alien. And I could go down that road.
And then on the Midnight Special, when you guys played that, anybody can go and see that it's on YouTube. It's amazing. That was one of the very few times that you guys would do live shows on TV, right?
On TV, yeah.
Yeah. People just didn't do a lot of live playing on TV when they were actually playing.
Well, there weren't formats for it either. There was,
right.
Rock concert and Midnight Special and in concert and.
It was a difficult thing to actually have people perform live on stage and record it with video and actually get the band playing live.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I remember the Tammy shows when I was a kid and seeing that stuff, all black and white. Remember the Janet Dean and James Brown. And all that. It wasn't an unknown format, or it wasn't like breaking new ground. But the idea of staging a concert as a TV series, you're right. And Bert Sugarman, by the way, what a wonderful human being that guy was. Because there were a lot of times when I was playing in the house band at the Midnight Special, which was 7 in the morning, and all the solo artists and all the charts, and most of the charts, if there were female singers, had been altered so much. I mean, he might as well just be, diving into a soup full of lentils. But so we worked and worked and worked and worked. Then the live acts would come on at the end of the show, and they'd use the applause from. It was a fabulous production. It was well thought out, and again, Bert did a hell of a job. And he was one of the nicest people I've ever met. I got to give him tremendous credit. Sometimes people, well, we've all had horrible experiences, not with Bert Sugarman, ever.
That was a unique. Like Walter played bass. I remember on live there. He's playing bass, and then Donald's playing the piano, and he had the two female background singers.
Right, they were David Cassidy's background singers.
Yeah,
killer singers.
Woo. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really an amazing band. Like I said, I people should go and check that out.
And high energy.
High energy.
And that's what inspired me, because as we started to do more live shows, Donald wanted me to sing my old school. So I began to get comfortable with it, and as it became more and more energetic, I just thought, one of these days, I want to see what this song really has in terms of energy potential. And so on the solo record, it's pretty thermonuclear.
Yeah, and you are standing up on the Midnight Special.
Oh, yeah.
No sitting down
because
on that one.
I thought in a lot of ways the band was subdued.
Yeah.
And if you're going to play for people, somebody's got to...
Well, you were right out front.
And somebody's got to do something.
Right. Someone's got to move.
So, okay, might as well be me. And I remember Donald years later saying, yeah, I hated to play live. But I look at something like the Midnight Special, he's having a ball.
He is having a ball.
So, I don't know.
You play on Rikki, Don't Lose That Number. You play the solo on that, right? So I interviewed Michael Omarty, and we talked about that, and he played the piano on that.
Yeah.
And you play the solo. And I love talking about these things where people that I interview actually played on the same songs. And I really love the guitar solo on that. And,
thank you.
And that's, I believe that is the most played Steely Dan song. If you look at Spotify, it's the most streamed of
it was their biggest hit, that's for sure.
Yeah.
More than a casual nod to Horace Silver.
Yeah.
I have a friend in town, he's heard your name. We can go out driving on slow hand road.
I love it.
We could
Little
stay
Phil.
inside and play games, I don't know. And you could have a change of heart. Rikki, don't lose that number. You don't wanna call nobody else. Send it off in a letter to yourself. Rikki, don't lose that number. It's the only one you own. You might use it if you feel better when you get home.
Double on La Pampa.
You tell yourself you're not my kind.
The ending of that solo, was that something that you actually worked out to lead back in? Because it's the perfect ending.
Yeah, I thought this solo I thought about because
Yeah.
I wanted it to be a composition. The song to me wasn't like sort of a crazy drive-in, go for it, pedal to the metal. It seemed almost symphonic
Yeah.
to me. So, and having, studied classical piano for 8 years and with love. I mean, you and I were talking about Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral, how much we both love that.
Yep.
And man, if Beethoven was alive, he would have been the best pedal steel guitar player ever on the planet, listening to those voicings. I thought I'd like to approach it that way as a composition and symphonic. So, okay, it's coming in with the straight ahead blues.
Yeah.
Made perfect sense to me because the the song is a little to the left. You know, there's parts of it that are pretty straight ahead, but it takes little journeys. So I thought, okay, let's get everybody comfortable. You know, just some straight ahead stuff. And then playing the pentatonic scale against a chord that doesn't really want a pentatonic scale says, okay, now we're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
So the Little Beaver, Curtis Mayfield, Jimi Hendrix sliding fifths stuff against the chord changes,
Yeah.
which are, again, it creates a new set of chords. You know, juxtaposing the both.
Sure.
So now we can move out. Now it's my turn to move away from the typical and stretch.
Yeah.
And then at the end, you have to resolve.
Yeah.
You know, you have to give people the satisfaction, the resolution.
That phrase, the last little bit, leads perfectly into the vocal there.
Well, because it's going right into the fourth.
Yes.
You know, so I wanted the melody to make the transition into the four chord.
Yeah. What would you have been playing through? What amp would you have been playing through back then, you think?
Well, I always had my trusty Paul Rivera Deluxe Reverb.
Even
LA
then,
session guy. Deluxe Reverb.
Talk about that. Talk
Right.
about that.
A lot of what I used was an Ampeg VT22.
Okay.
Great amplifier.
Great amplifiers.
Real underrated. I mean, powerhouse.
Oh, yeah.
Had a pair of 417 Altec Lansing 417Bs in it. Not just mean,
Yeah.
you know, for live. But the Deluxe I used a lot simply because I was used to it and I could get it to sound right.
Well, just talk about how session players, this was a common amp, and talk about the mod that
Paul Rivera was
did.
doing.
Yeah.
Well, when I first got to LA, you know, I started working, you know, in the guitar shop, and I started doing sessions. I ran into, you know, Dean Parks and a bunch of guys, and you know, I started to do sessions, and they said, "Well, here's what you have to do. You have to find Paul Rivera. You have to buy a Fender Deluxe and a Fender Princeton.
Yeah.
Take them down to Paul, have them modded, then you're good to go, and then you have to get yourself an ES335." Okay? All right? But I really like playing Fender guitars. You know, the long scale, 25 and a quarter inch scale.
Yeah.
So I kept leaning towards that, but I had that amp. And it's funny, I even used, I don't think it was modded, but I used the Deluxe Reverb turned up to 10 on the solo on Hot Stuff that Donna Summer song. Again, you know, and that's the guitar that I bought for $25, a Burns Bison Jr.
Okay.
And the guitar manufacturers hate me.
Now I'm thinking about this. Jay Graydon had the same amp with a mod. Larry Carlton did too. I mean, everybody had this thing.
Yeah, everybody.
So talk about the
Mitch Holder, you know, Dennis Budemer, everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it had a pull knob on the mid range that
Right.
would engage an extra gain stage. Is that what it was for distortion?
Yeah. It gave it a little more, I guess, punch is the best way to describe it.
And the purpose of this was just to bring it to a session, and it could do multiple things. You could do clean parts. You could do
there were no racks of stuff.
right.
You know, where Jay had a gym bag full of pedals.
Yeah.
I mean, we all had like a little suitcase or a box. That was it. You know,
What kind of pedals would you have had?
a
back
lot of
then?
Boss pedals.
Okay.
A lot of MXR.
Okay.
A lot of DOD because they were really and Electro Harmonics. They were really the pedal manufacturer guys.
Yeah.
And I started working for Roland in '75, designing or helping design a lot of guitar effects. So I had a Boss ME10, which had an analog front end, digital, back end. And I told you a story where I'm doing sessions, and by this time, it's like you're doing so many sessions. You got three guys at the cartage company. Stuff's coming in, stuff's going out, so that you can always have your stuff set up. And I got racks of stuff, lights, buzzers, whistles, all kinds of stuff. And one day Well, I can't remember what session we were doing. Chase looking at me, what's going on here? And I go, what do you mean? He says, you're not plugged into any of this stuff. I went, no, I'm using this Boss ME10. I just do this so the cartage guys can feed their families, and work. I mean, I don't care. This is fine with me. But, keeping it to a minimum. But you're right. Just about every amp was a deluxe or a Princeton for two reasons. One, you could carry it if you had to.
Yep.
And number two, for some reason, it became the LA sound. An ES335 through a modded deluxe was kind of Larry Carlton sound and Dean Parks, Dennis Budimir and Mitch Holder. That was their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, John Lando and myself were mostly playing Stratocasters, but
I assume that Steely Dan, when they decided to stop touring, you were like, okay, I want to be in a band that's playing gigs.
Well, I already was. Steely Dan was opening for the Doobie Brothers on a lot of shows.
Okay.
And they were kind enough to say, hey, would you like to sit in, play a couple songs? Sure. I'm electricity, amp, I'm in.
What songs would you sit in on?
I think there were songs like Rockin' Down the Highway, Listen to the Music, and because there were tunes that had spaces for soloing.
Sure.
So I did a couple of songs, and then it was 5 songs, then it was 10 songs, and then it was going on the road with them. And I was actually out on tour with the Doobies playing a festival in Nebworth in the UK when I got a call from the guys at Steely Dan and said, we're just not on tour anymore.
Right.
And so I'm sitting in a hotel room in London, and I hung up the phone. I said, well, that's it for me and Steely Dan. And one of the guys at Doobie said, well, now you're in the Doobie Brothers.
That was easy.
Great. And it was an easy transition because I'd already been playing it. Actually, for about a quarter of the show, I was playing drums.
Okay.
Because one of the drummers wanted to play percussion.
Okay.
And I'd also played drums when I was a kid. So it was a fantastic musical experience, great band. Mm-hmm. And certainly we went on to, I think, make a musical mark.
The first record that you played on, though, would be Taking
Captain of Me, or
was it? Yeah, I think it was.
playing pedal steel.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is my favorite instrument in the world. But
Okay, so pedal steel, I always say it's the hardest instrument to play.
it's not easy.
Why is it so hard to play? I've tried to play a couple times and everything. I'm like, no, it's just so many things that you have to know
Well,
about.
it probably helps if you have a pilot's license. But it's difficult because it's asking you to think in a very nonlinear fashion, because for want of a better technical term, there are bunches of things that you have to do in the moment. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the evolution of steel guitar, it's funny, back in the day, before anybody decided to put pedals that changed the pitches, I think that was the Bixby Electro Harp was the first one. There were 4 necks with different tunings.
Yeah.
The guys were reaching around just trying to figure out different ways to get all the chords.
Yeah.
Originally, there was one pedal that raised the 3rd to a 4th and the 5th to a 6th. So if you were playing a G chord, the 3rd would go up to a 4th, the 5th would go up to a 6th, and then you had a C chord.
C chord, yeah.
And there was a record, and I'm trying to remember, it wasn't Jimmy Day, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who did it for the first time. And everybody went, what is that? And then off to the races. So you have an instrument where you have separate tunings, which allow you to address different chord structures in different ways. You have the pedals, which raise and lower the strings, and can raise and lower at the same time. You could raise a string up a whole tone, lower it to a half tone. Or you can split, where you raise one and lower the other at the same time. So you can do things inside chords. And then you have knee levers, which also raise and lower. And then you have up levers, which raise
Right.
and lower. And then if you really are running out of stuff, use your little finger behind the bar and you grab the string if you need a little something. So probably the closest instrument would be the harp, because the harp has presets, pedals that
Right.
grab different sets of strings to give you a preset scale.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the closest thing, but it's presets. You don't change them while you're playing. It's too clunky.
Yeah.
So now Red Rhodes, who was one of my favorite people, Red and I had a guitar shop together, and we played a lot of country gigs together. We played a lot of the crap holes, the Jack of Diamonds, Hitchin Post, places up in Bakersfield, Playtime, Chicken Wire, all that stuff. Red loves to tell the story where he decided that one day he had to figure out a way to raise and lower the B string on the pedal steel. So he drilled a hole underneath the B string on the headstock, slipped a steel wire through it, put a fish hook on the end of it, and then brought the other end on and looped around his big toe. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's a great story.
Great story.
But it shows you that people were pushing. And then, of course, Clarence White invented the B-bender to be able to raise the B string up a whole tone.
Did you ever use a B-bender?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. And when I was in Linda Ronstadt's band, we had a wonderful guitar player who was a physicist by trade, but was a brilliant B-bender guitar player. And because he was a physicist, he thought of things in very linear fashion, when I say linear, meaning that it's three-dimensional. Because on a guitar, you do have three dimensions. Actually, if you look at a guitar, it has strings and frets. Well, from a physicist's point of view in mathematics, it's a set of XY coordinates.
Right.
Now, if you bend strings, that's a Z coordinate. So instead of this way and this way, you also have this way.
Yes.
Now, the pedal steel is the ultimate of the Z coordinate. So it's thinking of chords in three dimensions. Wow. And moving inside three dimensions, which to me is like, ever played three-dimensional chess?
No.
It's wacky.
When did you have the time to learn that, to learn steel guitar? When
Shedding, that's what you do. You spend every waking minute working on the instrument, listening to other players. I listened a lot to Curly Chalker, Lloyd Green, Buddy Emmons.
So would you take stuff off records and
I'd learn everything.
Learn
yeah.
everything. Okay.
And I would transpose what I needed so I could practice later. And I came up with a wacky method of transposing pedal steel. I don't know. But shedding. And then so about 3 years ago, I was talking to Slash, and I said, the way you approach the instrument, you should learn to play pedal steel. And they went, that's really hard. I said, yeah, but you also approach it from a combination of keyboard and guitar. Mm-hmm. I could hear it in your playing, the way you look at it. And so we got him a pedal steel. I lent him mine for a while, or one of mine for a while. And now he's shedding his butt off.
Okay.
And he's doing really well. But you got to put the time in. I mean, you have to put the time in. Because it's familiar and alien at the same time. It's not for everybody. But I think it's the most beautiful instrument in the world. And now that I have one that I got the guys at Roland to MIDI up for me, forget about it.
MIDI a pedal steel?
Oh, yeah. What do you need? 4 violas, 2 cellos? Yeah, that's no problem. Choir? No big deal. Piano? If you think McCoy Tyner was good at moving, when the bar quantizes the piano, it's not like McCoy Tyner at light speed. I mean, the stuff you could do on that instrument is fabulous. And now you can play any instrument on it. It's beautiful to play nylon string.
Wow.
And a harp. Oh, yeah. Nice chords. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting...
You just reminded me of something.
So I did a lot of pedal steel on Steely Dan.
Yes.
And it was sideways. They didn't want... This is not country music.
Well, okay, that's interesting that you say that. So when I was interviewing Michael Mardian, I said, you know, because of the add 9 chords and stuff that he would play on the piano, like in Rikki, Don't Lose That Number, and some of the stuff you would do in your solos, I said Steely Dan had a lot of country elements to it that I don't think, especially the early Steely Dan did, that I don't think people really thought of that way. And it just occurred to me, and then you just said that. The instrumentation, the types
Well, the first single was a song called Dallas that they pulled.
Yes, I remember
Because
that.
Walter and Donald thought with the name Steely Dan and the fact that it was pedal steel and country guitar playing, Jimmy
Yeah.
Hodder sang the crap out of that song.
Yeah,
Poco covered it because it was such a great song.
yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of country elements, and the only return to that, other than, as you say, flavor and spice, was a song called With a Gun, which was a stoned Steely Dan country song.
That band evolved over such a short period of time. I'm really, those records were 1 year apart, starting with Can't Buy a Thrill, Countdown to Ecstasy, Pretzel Logic, Royal Scam, and then Asia.
I think it was Asia. Yeah.
Asia. 5-year period, 5 albums, and a dramatic change in style. You'd have things sprinkled in, songs on the first few records that were more, that would have those jazz elements and the major add 9s and the sharp 9 chords
Well,
and
the
things
mu
like
chord
that.
that,
the mu chord, yeah. They would have those things,
Like a
but
major second on every chord you could find.
Sure, but then eventually by Asia, then it would be these longer explorations that they would have. But those country elements to me, I never thought about it, but because I don't think radio was defined in that way. You had so much leeway to do a lot of different styles.
Well, after a while, I mean, in the beginning, radio was very formatted. Mm-hmm. But you're right, as with the rise of FM radio,
Yes, in the 70s.
and the influence that FM had on AM, opening the aperture, you might say. You're right.
Just out of curiosity, would you, when you were in Steely Dan, then in the Doobie Brothers, would artists do radio stations, like go to radio stations and play? Is that, or was that a
Yeah.
thing of later on? Would you do that back then?
I remember somebody just sent me something that Steely Dan did early on at the record plant. It was video as well.
Okay.
And then I remember when we were with Linda Ronstadt, we went up to a radio station in San Francisco, did a concert. There was some of that. I mean, that for a radio station, they would have to find a place and, call Gary Callagher and get the record plant truck up there, or, whatever. But there was some of that.
And in live touring, you'd have bands that were really varied in style. Some of the people I've interviewed that played fusion would open for rock bands and things like that.
Yeah.
And that was very common to mix these genres.
Well, again, FM radio had done a couple of things. First, it allowed long format music, which was so the antithesis of AM. We used to do what we called pencil edits. If the song was 3 minutes and 8 seconds, we go 3 minutes and hope nobody noticed, because everything was very formatted.
Sure.
So FM radio allowed people to open up, which again influenced AM radio, but also because now there were a number of very different style bands.
Yep.
The audiences were also listening to a number of different kinds of music. So if you had a concert that had 2 or 3 different bands of different genres, the audience was familiar. So it wasn't like, what the hell is that? As opposed to listening to albums. And you mentioned something about how Steely Dan albums changed. The other band where the albums changed,
Doobie Brothers. Yes. So I interviewed Michael McDonald, and we talked about him joining the band and the stylistically how it changed because of the piano things that he did. I mean, songs like Taking It to the Streets, the intro to that, those voicings are really piano,
Well, yeah.
piano voicings.
Well, bringing a keyboard into a band. I mean, Billy Payne did a lot of stuff, but that changes everything.
Yeah.
And then because I had, as you say, I have my style of playing, and Michael and I had played together at Steely Dan, and when I brought Mike into the Doobie Brothers, I thought this is going to be a great opportunity to try something different. So you listen to Stampede, then Taking It to the Streets. And then you listen to Living on the Fault Line,
Yes.
which I think ultimately will end up being the best Doobie Brothers album. Not yet,
Right.
but someday.
That's the least known of the
Right.
of the Doobie Brothers records.
Because
Yes.
at that time, I was talking to Ted Templeman, the producer of the Doobies. I said, you know what? I got an idea. I'm gonna ask the guys in the Doobies if they would like to start doing sessions as a rhythm section. And Ted said, that's a great idea. So Leo Sayer, Carly Simon, Hoyt Axton, and this is my game. They don't care what band you're in, how famous you are, how cool your shoes are. Downbeats at 9, screw it up, you're fired.
Right.
I happen to like that format.
Okay.
To the credit of that band, the depth of musicianship I always knew was there, but I thought never really had a chance to evolve. So these guys are doing sessions, and they're hunkering down, and they don't care who you are. Okay, take it for letter A. And I remember when we did the Living on the Fault Line album, which I think had to happen to be able to do the minute by minute album.
Right.
When you listen to I hesitate to use the word sophistication because it has weird connotations, but the different, the multi-layered levels
Yes.
of musicianship.
Yeah.
I remember we were doing that album, and the band was a rockin' band for a long time.
Yeah.
And a great with Tom and Pat. I mean, there was nothing
Amazing.
to say about that was at all negative. But we were listening to one of the tracks, and Keith Knudsen, one of the drummers, said, I dropped a snare drum beat in bar 53. And I went, bingo. Welcome to my world. This is now everybody from doing those sessions and really concentrating. That became the guiding light. And everybody stepped up. There was nobody in that band that didn't have the depth of musical talent to be able to go anywhere.
Right.
When I listen to Living on the Fault Line, I still wonder how, there's some really interesting stuff
There
on
are.
there.
I was listening to it the other day, and I remember I had it in high school, and I love that record, and I was thinking the same thing, that's an underappreciated record, and it will have its time, that people will say, yeah, that record. But for you, from doing session work, the addition, Michael McDonald coming into the band and playing these piano-oriented things that were more, the types of voicings and chord progressions that he
Stuff
did.
that I loved because
Yes.
that's my
Yeah.
world.
And that was not, for you, it's like it didn't matter. You could play over anything like that. That seems like a natural transition for you.
Well, I think that's we kind of guided it. And again, there was no running to catch up with anybody in that band. Tyran Porter is probably the most underrated bass player in the universe.
Great bass player.
It's hard to describe the depth. You talk about stylistic, and
Yeah.
nobody can imitate him.
Yeah.
Pat Simmons has a very unique style of guitar playing, and because he's comfortable with open tunings, his overview of chordal structures, I don't even think he knew it. It was just there. And then all of a sudden it began to bubble up because he had to call on that. as the voicings became more and more intricate.
I want to just play, just so people know what we're talking about. I always like to demonstrate.
Now listen to Tyran.
Yeah. Amazing.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother. I was raised here in this living hell. You don't know my
Dotted eighth note, thank you.
So this chord progression, it's F minor with a G, then it's like the dun dun is F to C, and then he goes like D7. These are all with a G bass though on the piano. D7, then D7 over G, and then G7 sus4, and that was unlike anything that the Doobies had done or anyone had done. That was really
Well, and F
unique.
with the G in the bass too.
Yeah,
Now that was on the piano. Now Tyran's, thinking coming at this from a whole other place.
right.
And the chord that it creates,
Yes.
it's fantastic.
Yeah, so this was really, I mean, for me, I was in high school during this time period, and the way the band changed, you just kind of accepted these things. You didn't even think about it. It was more hits, and even though it was a different style, some of the songs were a different style. None of us gave it a thought. It's like, oh man, this is amazing.
Well, they took some flack.
Yeah.
There were people that said, "Oh, it's not like the old Doobie Brothers." Well, I didn't see a whole lot of people weeping when Fleetwood Mac,
Right.
I mean,
Case in point.
or the Moody Blues, or come on.
Yeah.
And if you're not evolving, you should be doing something else.
Now, the Minute by Minute record was a massively big record.
Ted Templeman hated it, thought it was a crap.
Okay, I want to ask you about Ted Templeman. So Ted Templeman,
Who was, by the way, incredible producer, amazing human being.
I want to say that record was probably 1978, and he was doing Van Halen at the same time. He did both, which is really, to my mind, pretty amazing to have that
I think that's
much
a
range.
good thing.
I think it's
Because I
incredible.
was producing a Livingston Taylor album and Billy and the Beaters at the same time, in 2 rooms right next to each other. And to me, even though the manager he's got his panties all twisted up, to me that was an incredible perspective. So I'm sure that's what Ted was doing, is drawing from both.
Tell me a little bit about Ted, about his approach in the studio, because I don't know much about. I mean, I have his book, but from someone that actually worked with him making records. What was Ted like to work with in the studio?
Great. It was open-minded. His input was painless, and he was a closet jazzer.
Okay.
I mean, he used to laugh because a lot of times when I would be playing stuff, I'd throw something in like Salt Peanuts or something with Dizzy Gillespie. He knew exactly what was going on, so that we had that common ground.
Okay.
And he loved the idea of having the band go out and work as a rhythm section because it gave him even more creative possibilities to be able to push the band in a different direction. Yeah, I always enjoyed working with him. I would drive him crazy sometimes because I always like to push the envelope, but no, I enjoyed working with him a lot.
How long would it take to make these records, like minute by minute? How long would the process go on for?
I think it was about 6 months.
And as the band progressed, each album, would you take more time on the records? Or would you tour
No,
in
it was
between?
pretty much about the same.
Okay.
I mean, Stampede, I think, went a little quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But, hey, Steely Dan, it took us 6 months just to find a comfortable chair at $300 an hour. I mean, so there are limits, but no wine before it's time, right?
I always wondered about when you would finish these records, would you know that the songs that were going to be the singles, or was this something that Ted would talk about with the record company How much input would the band have in these things?
Well, everybody had their favorites.
Yeah.
But I think we were sort of classical record guys giving a tremendous amount of confidence to the expertise of the record company because we figured they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they were. Mm-hmm. Minute by minute, that song, if that had come out a year before or a year later, I think nobody would have ever played it.
Right.
It was just one of those weird things.
Yeah.
It was like the McCoys finally got a hit with Hang On Sloopy after 8 other bands had recorded it.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
Yeah.
It's all about timing. But Ted, really, I remember him saying that he just didn't think there was anything on this record that was going to work. But again, open-minded. I think Russ Thyrett and Mo Austin, this guy, they had a lot of input on this.
Yeah.
And I mean, Mo had great ears. Anyway,
Yeah.
and Russ Titleman as well. I mean, Russ Titleman and Ted Templeman used to, bounce off each other. But Ted was pretty open. I mean, we were in my cheesy little studio, myself and Michael, and we did a demo on Keeps You Running with a cheesy drum machine and an even cheesier keyboard. It was just me and him. Him and I, sorry. And when we tried to cut the track, could not get it. No matter what happened. I mean, we went after that for days. Ted said, nah, it's just not there. So he ended up using that track. So if you listen to it, you can hear the cheesy drum machine in the beginning and this kind of cheesy piano. And we built the track around that. I cut that on a TX 3340S 4-track.
I'm going to play it here. Oh my God.
It's a Roland R77. And it worked.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I always wondered about that.
Yeah.
Wow. So how did you actually use that?
I took my 3340.
Yeah. Brought it in the studio, took the outputs, put it through 2 channels, put it on the
4
multi-track.
channels.
4 channels.
Because it was the first home recording system that you had multi-sync, that you could record on multiple tracks separately. That's why I got it, because everybody was experimenting by that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just brought the machine in, queued up the tape, and then they dumped it to the 24-track.
Amazing.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. So tell me what you're doing right now.
Well, I'm still alive and kicking, and this first solo album was interesting. I did it with a friend of mine, C.J. Benson, who's a fabulous keyboard player. We co-produced it together. A lot of co-songwriting together, and had friends. Had Clint Black doing something he'd never done before, Johnny Lang and Michael McDonald, and all guys came who wanted to work on it. It was originally going to be an instrumental album. I just wanted to do 12 versions of Apache. I mean, that's But now I'm kind of into it, and so I'm exploring what do I want to do next. I mean, I'm not really sure. Not really sure, because you check your boxes. I wanted to be a student musician on a #1 record. I wanted to produce a #1 record. I wanted to engineer a #1 record. I wanted to,
You checked them all a long time
check
ago.
the boxes, which may sound a little disingenuous, but I think having some goals is a good thing.
Absolutely.
It's a bucket list of
Absolutely.
sorts. So I've been very lucky. I've been blessed in a lot of ways. A lot of what I've wanted to do has come true. So I've been out touring with this record. And then we just did something in Nashville called Live at the Analog. And it's a PBS special. Slash did one, Mike McDonald did one. And it's it's a series, and they're releasing it on PBS. But a lot of people are going to the PBS site to watch it. And it's myself and this unbelievable band. Keyboard players, David Crosby's son, ferocious keyboard player. Drummer, Mark Damian, is one of these young whiz kids. I mean, you know, first time I heard him play a shuffle, it's like, okay, this guy's a real drummer. Because shuffles are hard.
Shuffles are hard.
Bakar was good. Vinny's good.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of guys good at this. Bass player is a great singer and also happens to be the bass player for the Detroit Symphony. So this band is frightening. There's nothing, no place they won't go. So that is part of the fun, is playing live and seeing where stuff goes. I mean, all of a sudden, out of the Johnny Lang song comes a bass solo, and now Hank's singing Blackbird. Yeah, all right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Because, again, when you have great players, wherever you go, I remember doing a session with Oscar Peterson one time. We just given Oscar Peterson a Roland Jupiter 8 synthesizer.
He
Which is like lighting dry grass.
Yeah,
I mean,
he loved synthesizers.
Yeah, but this was his first time, and we're all going, whoa, okay. So we're doing Sweet Georgia Brown, and I tell this story live. We're doing Sweet Georgia Brown, and he's burning it on fire, and we're going, and we're going, and we're going, and the engineer's like, finally we stop. The engineer hits the talkback and says, I was trying to tell you guys, we ran out of tape. And Oscar Peterson said, I know. I just wanted to see where it was going. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. I just want to see where it's going. So being able to play live with great players, we'll probably do another album. I want to do I've always wanted to do a Christmas album. I know that sounds silly, but at the 1 year at the Kennedy Center, they asked me to play for the Christmas special. And I said, okay, and they said, well, we want you to do Silent Night. Okay, so can you go to the Smithsonian, take a picture of the original manuscript of Stillnacht, and I'll play classical guitar. I'll play what's on that.
Yeah.
And they said, what else do you want to do? I said, I want to play pedal steel on Oh Holy Night with a 160 voice choir in the orchestra. They went, okay. So when that, in the center of that song, playing steel with 160 voices, I want to see where it's going. If this is the future, I want to see where it's going.
Well, Skunk, it's been an honor to sit with you today.
Thank you for your hospitality. It's been fun.
Just amazing to hear your story and to.
Well, you're very kind, and I'm amazed anybody else cares what I have to say. So
I really appreciate it. Thanks.
I'd like to once again thank Skunk for being my guest today. Leave a comment, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.